Husband caught wife cheating, secretly filmed it, and plotted a surprising long-term revenge. Ryan, a hardworking and dedicated family man, had always prided himself on balancing his responsibilities as a husband, father, and provider. His recent promotion to shift foreman on the night crew at work felt like a blessing. It allowed him to attend his teenage son Tim's school events during the day, an opportunity he cherished. With a few days off before starting the new schedule, Brian decided to renovate the small apartment above their garage into a quiet retreat. It would be a place for him to rest during the day without disturbing Brenda or Tim. As part of the renovations, Brian was running internet cables and installing a Wi-Fi extender in the attic. While he worked, unexpected noises from the house caught his attention. Brenda was supposed to be at work, and Tim was visiting her parents. No one should have been home. Curiosity turned to dread as the sounds grew clearer: voices, laughter, and then something unmistakable. The noises were coming from their bedroom. Brian's heart pounded as he silently moved toward the source, his mind racing. Carefully positioning himself above an old air conditioning vent he hadn't yet removed, he peered through. What he saw shattered his world. Brenda, his wife of 15 years, was in bed with another man. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. Frozen in disbelief, Brian watched as they embraced, whispered, and laughed, completely unaware of his presence. His mind screamed to confront them, but he held back, forcing himself to stay silent. Reaching for his phone, Brian began recording. The camera's lens captured the betrayal unfolding below, a betrayal that was more than physical. The man's smug voice grated on Brian's ears as he asked, "Does your husband ever satisfy you? Or is he lacking?" "I've asked you not to bring up Brian," Brenda replied, her voice weak and unconvincing. "This isn't about him. He's a good lover and a great father." The man chuckled. "Sure he is. And yet, here we are in his bed. Something doesn't add up." Brian clenched his fists, every word cutting deeper. Brenda tried to justify herself, but her tone lacked conviction. "I don't know why I let you talk me into this," she said. "This is the last time." "Oh, don't act like you're not enjoying this," the man replied. "There's nothing like the thrill of being with a married woman in her husband's bed." Brian recognized the man as Bill Grant, a delivery driver at Brenda's company. Recently divorced, Bill had a reputation for being flirtatious. The knowledge that he had brought his infidelity into Brian's home, into his bed, was unbearable. But Brian stayed calm, quietly recording until the moment ended. When Brenda finally returned to work, Brian descended from the attic, his emotions a mix of anger, heartbreak, and determination. He knew confronting her now wouldn't serve his purpose. She wasn't worth losing his composure over, not yet. Instead, Brian focused on his son, Tim. Tim's happiness and stability were all that mattered now. Brenda's feelings were irrelevant. Ryan decided he would stay in the marriage until Tim graduated high school, ensuring his son's world remained untouched by his wife's betrayal. That night, Brenda came home to find Brian in the kitchen, calm and composed. "You're home early," she said, her voice filled with surprise. "Did something happen at work?" "Yeah," Brian replied, masking his emotions. "They've asked me to start night shifts early. I'll head back later tonight." Brenda didn't suspect a thing. Her only reaction was mild concern for his schedule. Brian played along, suppressing the urge to call her out on her lies. Instead, he made small talk, watching her closely. For the first time, he noticed the signs he had overlooked for years, the slight aging in her face, the disinterest in her tone. Love had blinded him to these changes, but now he saw them with painful clarity. Over the next few days, Brian threw himself into renovating the garage apartment. He hired contractors to speed up the process, ensuring it would be soundproof and completely self-sufficient. The space would include a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a living area, his personal haven. By the end of the week, the transformation was nearly complete. When Brenda asked about the renovations, Brian kept his answers vague. "It's for the night shifts," he said. "I need a quiet place to sleep during the day." Brenda seemed puzzled, but didn't press further. Her confusion only deepened when Brian began sleeping in the guest room. "Why aren't you sleeping in our bed?" she asked one evening. "I don't want to disturb you," Brian replied. "Besides, you've seemed tired lately. I figured you could use the space." Brenda's reaction was exactly what he anticipated, a brief flicker of guilt, quickly replaced by a weak smile. "You're thoughtful," she said, though her voice lacked sincerity. Brian smirked internally. She had no idea he was aware of her affair, and he planned to keep it that way for now. In the weeks that followed, Brian continued to distance himself emotionally from Brenda. He focused on Tim, attending his baseball games and encouraging his interests. When he suggested a father-son outing to a Diamondbacks game, Tim was thrilled. Brenda, however, declined, claiming she wasn't a fan of baseball. "I'm sure you'll find something to do at home," Brian muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Brenda's uneasy expression was all the confirmation he needed. Her affair with Bill was likely ongoing. By Labor Day weekend, Brian had fully moved into the garage apartment. He furnished it with care, creating a space that felt like home. Brenda, noticing the changes, grew increasingly uneasy. "You're acting distant," she said one evening. "Is something wrong?" Brian shrugged. "I'm just adjusting to the night shifts. It's nothing personal." But it was personal. Every moment spent in that house with her was a reminder of her betrayal. Yet Brian refused to confront her outright. Instead, he let his actions speak for him. The final piece of his plan came into place when he discreetly consulted a lawyer. He made sure everything was in order: his finances, custody arrangements for Tim, and even evidence of Brenda's affair. When the time was right, he would strike. For now, Brenda remained oblivious, thinking she had gotten away with her betrayal. But Brian's quiet revenge was brewing, and when it unfolded, she would face the consequences of her actions. As Brian settled into his new routine, he found a sense of peace. He had been betrayed, yes, but he refused to let it define him. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his life one brick, one step at a time. Brenda had no idea the storm that was coming. Brian opened the door, his eyes briefly drawn to Scooter's mom's toned legs in running shorts. He quickly averted his gaze, but she noticed and teased. "Do you think my legs look good compared to everything else?" Brian chuckled, playing along. "Yeah, they're great." "Good to know," she grinned. "Now, do you think I should let my son go to a baseball game with a guy who checks out every woman he sees?" "Well, if that guy is me, then absolutely," Brian joked. "It's part of being a guy teaching Scooter to appreciate women. I'll teach him what to look for." "I just hope you're more subtle during those lessons," she quipped. "And his first lesson will be to smack anyone who calls him Horace except you, of course." "Assertiveness and an appreciation for women," she mused. "You're quite the teacher." Brian laughed. "Not just women's legs, but the whole picture." Scooter's mom, now smiling wider, said, "Thanks for inviting him. By the way, I'm Gertrude. And before you ask, my guy friends call me Minx, Raven, or Bubbles. My girlfriends stick with Gertrude." "Minx it is," Brian said with a grin. As they drove to the game, Brian and Scooter bonded over their shared love of baseball. Scooter even caught a foul ball, and by the time they returned, the teen was passed out in the back seat, stuffed with hot dogs and soda. At the door, Gertrude greeted them with a smile. "Looks like someone had a little too much fun," she said. "All part of the experience," Brian replied. Over time, Brian found himself drawn deeper into the lives of Scooter and Gertrude. He spent more time coaching and connecting with Scooter, while also noticing an unusual camaraderie with Gertrude, who always managed to keep things lighthearted. One day, as they sat after practice, Brian asked, "Hey, Minx, can I ask you something? Have you noticed the other moms treating me differently?" Gertrude smirked. "You really don't get it, do you? They're single, and you're the whole package, handsome, good with kids, and clearly devoted to your family." "But I'm married," Brian replied, confused. "Technically, yeah, but words out about your wife. Everyone knows she's seeing someone else, and they know you're not sharing a bed anymore." Brian stiffened. "How does everyone know that?" "Small town, Brian. Gossip spreads fast." Brian shared more of his struggles with Gertrude. "I caught Brenda with Grant," he admitted. "But I stayed for Tim's sake. She thinks I don't know, and I'd rather keep it that way until he graduates." Gertrude shook her head. "You deserve better. Everyone sees the effort you're putting into Tim and Scooter. You're a great dad, Brian." Brian smiled faintly. "Thanks, Minx. That means a lot." At the district championship, the dynamic shifted again. While Brian cheered Tim and Scooter on, he noticed some of the single moms vying for his attention, their intentions increasingly obvious. Gertrude handed him a soda and teased, "Looks like you've got a fan club." Before Brian could respond, Brenda arrived. "I thought I'd join my husband today," she said loudly, her tone pointed. The atmosphere grew tense as Brenda sat beside Brian, scrutinizing the women around him. After the game, Tim and Scooter celebrated a big win with pizza, while Brenda observed from a distance. For the first time, she noticed the life Brian had built apart from her, the respect he earned, the connections he formed, and the admiration he garnered. As the team celebrated their luck in finding parking, Brenda walked in to find Brian surrounded by Norma Wilson and Brandy Dorn, who were a little too close for comfort. As she approached, the two women quickly stepped back. This scene reminded her of a recent conversation with her lover, Bill Grant. "Isn't it time we used your bed again?" Bill had suggested as Brenda was getting dressed after their rendezvous. "Getting it on in your husband's bed really gets me going," Bill added, smirking. "But you promised not to until Brian and I did it," Brenda reminded him. "I don't want to take the risk." "Wait, are you saying you two haven't done it since we last hooked up?" Bill asked, incredulous. "You said you'd keep him on hold until he made a move." "He's been on night shifts lately," Brenda explained, "and sleeping in the garage room. We haven't even hugged since." "That's ridiculous," Bill scoffed. "He's too young, and you're too attractive for him to lose interest. Is he not straight or seeing someone else?" "He's definitely not gay," Brenda replied firmly. "He's very masculine and loyal. He's just tired from working nights and only joins us for dinner on weekends. He's busy with yard work and stuff. Any regular guy married to someone as attractive as you wouldn't willingly go without, even with long hours. He must be messing around." "That should make it easier for us to hook up," Bill grinned. "He's getting his, and I'm getting what used to be his." "Brian would never cheat on me," Brenda declared firmly. "He takes our marriage vows seriously. He's not the type to sneak around." "Is that what you're doing?" Bill asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, not exactly," Brenda confessed. "This is just temporary. He's been busy with work and Tim's baseball. He hasn't been paying much attention to me, and I deserve a little fun. I work hard managing the house, cooking meals, and holding down a full-time job." Bill grinned. "I guess you're right. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. Give me a day when I can have you in your bed, he said, his voice laced with desire. As Brenda recalled Bill's words, a sense of concern crept over her as she watched the two women flirt with Brian. It was clear he had attractive women interested in him, and Brenda realized she needed to protect her marriage from their advances. Then, she spotted Gertrude sitting alone and quickly devised a plan. With a friendly smile, she walked over and sat beside her. "It's nice to see you, Gertrude," Brenda said. "Horace has become quite the ball player. You must be proud." "I am," Gertrude answered cautiously. "Tim's doing great. Brian's time with him is really paying off. He's been an incredible mentor to Horace." Brenda seized the moment. "Yeah, sometimes Brian's just too nice," she said. "You've probably noticed all those blondes hanging around him. I was thinking maybe you could help me out. I know Brian wouldn't stray under normal circumstances, but he's still a man, and those women practically throw themselves at him." Gertrude raised an eyebrow. "How exactly do you think you could help me?" Brenda leaned in, her voice dropping. "You don't think I should just spray them with cold water when they get too close, do you?" Gertrude joked. Brenda shook her head. "I can't make it to most of the games and practices because of work, but I trust Brian with you. You're not his type at all. If you could just stay by him when I'm not around, I'd really appreciate it. I plan to tell Brian he should stay closer to you, act more attentive. The other women might back off if they think he's settled on you. It might be awkward for you, but it's for a good cause. You could help save our marriage." Gertrude stared at her, incredulity in her eyes. "So, you're telling me that these attractive single mothers might tempt Brian, and you want me to take your place at the games and practices? You think I'm a safe choice because I'm not as flashy?" "I didn't mean it like that," Brenda said quickly. "I just know Brian. He's less likely to be swayed by you than some busty ex-cheerleader type. You'd be helping him stay faithful." Gertrude hesitated before speaking. "Do you think cheating is unforgivable?" Brenda's frown deepened. "Cheating is a deal breaker for me. I love my husband, but infidelity destroys everything. I can't accept it. You know how I feel about loyalty. It's just logical that cheating violates the marriage contract." Gertrude nodded. "I agree. I'll keep an eye on him when you're not around." Brenda sighed with relief. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." Brian's words cut through the air, sharper than he intended. It wasn't like him to be so harsh, but it served its purpose. He was distancing himself from Brenda. Still, guilt lingered. The thought of how far his marriage had fallen gnawed at him. As Brenda lay beside him, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Was he upset because they hadn't been intimate lately? Or did he know about her affair? She realized a serious conversation was long overdue. She couldn't keep avoiding him, especially after the careless remark about Bill in their marital bed. That slip-up might raise suspicions and shatter whatever was left of their relationship. Brian's routine was simple. After his shift, he'd grab a light breakfast, then crash by 9 a.m. Around 2 p.m., he'd wake to find Minx in bed with him, and they'd share a quiet hour before she left to meet Scooter. With baseball season over, Brian was focusing on getting rest, preparing for Tim's return from school. The cycle worked for both him and Minx. One evening, Tim's voice cracked through the phone, urgent. "Dad, Scooter and I are with Heather and Holly in Heather's car. We hit a flat tire, and there's no spare. We're stuck on D Street, and there's some guys hanging around the arcade. I'm worried." "D Street?" Brian cursed under his breath. "Is Heather in that Corolla?" "Yeah, the 2017 model," Tim replied. "I'm on it. Stay inside, keep your doors locked, and call the cops if you need to," Brian said. I'll take care of it. Brian found Gus, who still had his Corolla. Gus, you got a tire I can borrow? Fast. Gus nodded. Let's go. I've got a proper spare, not one of those crappy donuts. Jack Reynolds, passing by, overheard and joined them. What's going on? Tim and the others are stuck on D Street. Could you come with us? I'm grabbing a tire from Gus. With Jack and Gus in tow, Brian's concern grew. The area wasn't the safest, especially at night with teenage girls out there. Meanwhile, Brenda was at work, distracted. Bill's phone rang, and when he saw the caller ID, he sighed. It's Heather. I have to take this or she'll keep calling. Brenda listened closely, catching only Bill's side of the conversation, but it was enough to unsettle her. What's going on down there? Bill asked, his tone dismissive. The boys should handle it. Call AAA. Not my problem that your mom doesn't keep a spare tire. After hanging up, Brenda asked, What was that about? Bill waved her off. Heather's got a flat. She's fine. She's getting help from AAA. Brian arrived at D Street, where a few tough-looking guys were hanging around. He immediately took charge, grabbing the tire iron. Stay put till we get this fixed, he told Heather. If those guys try anything, we'll handle it. Holly, you'll need to explain to your mom. As Brian worked, one of the tough guys stepped forward, claiming it was their turf. Before he could finish, Brian swung the tire iron, knocking him to the ground with a sharp blow to the shins. Jack and Gus handled the other two. Brian finished replacing the tire and stood up, accidentally kicking the leader in the groin as he stepped over him. Got something to say? He asked, twirling the tire iron casually. The tough guys quickly scattered, and as they drove off, Gus joked about the night's events. The next morning, Minx jumped into bed with Brian, kissing him passionately. I heard about last night, she said, her voice a seductive purr. You were amazing. I would have come earlier, but I had to wait for Tim and Horace to check on the girls. At work, Brenda was just starting her shift when Sue Blaine approached her. I heard how Brian and his crew handled those punks on D Street. A good whack with a tire iron goes a long way, Sue said with a grin. Brenda's mind raced. Heather had reached out to Bill, and he had brushed her off. Brian and his crew had stepped in, protecting the kids. Bill had done nothing. Later, in the break room, Brenda confronted Bill. Heather called you last night, and you turned her away. Those kids could have been in serious danger. What kind of dad does that? Bill shrugged. It turned out fine. Brian and his buddies handled it. Brenda's anger boiled over. Your daughter needed you, and you did nothing. Brian acted like a real man while you just didn't care. Bill laughed, taking a sip of soda. Brian's a nice guy, but let's face it, he's no competition. Later, when Brenda got home, Minx was there with Brian. As Brenda stood in the doorway, tears ran down her face. How could you do this to me? She sobbed. Minx calmly dressed. I was just following your instructions. You didn't want Brian to get too close, so I helped. I didn't want to sleep with him, but he needed release. I did what you asked. Brenda's anger flared. I can't believe Brian would cheat on me like this. With you. Minx shrugged. Brian had nowhere else to turn. Bill kept you away from him, so I stepped in. Why didn't he say anything? Brenda cried. You know how guys are when they find out their wives are cheating. He probably didn't want to deal with the fallout. But deep down, he checked out of your marriage a long time ago. Minx replied coolly. Brenda's world crumbled. I was too blind to see it, she whispered. You're not the only one, Minx said. I came along after you messed things up. I helped Brian heal. Brenda's realization hit her hard. I broke things off with Bill, she declared, wiping away her tears. I never want to see him again. You didn't have much of a choice, Minx remarked. Even cheaters have their limits. The two women locked eyes. Brenda had lost everything. Are you and Brian moving in together now? She asked, her voice cracking. We're happy with how things are, Minx answered. Boris and I are heading back to La before school starts. I'd rather he doesn't find out his mom's dating his best friend's dad, if I can help it. Brenda's eyes narrowed. What if I stop this? He's my husband. You can't just sleep with him. Minx shrugged. You gave me that right when you got with Bill Grant. That freed Brian from any obligations to you. He and I are committed to each other now. Brenda's voice trembled. What about Bill? Who knows who else he's been with? Minx stared at her coldly. Couldn't have been cheating with someone else, huh? Now you're thinking about getting tested? Brenda hesitated. So what now? Nothing. It's over, Minx said as she grabbed her coat and prepared to leave. Well, that's a wrap on today's story. We hope you enjoyed this wild ride through the twists and turns of betrayal, loyalty, and unexpected alliances. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. Also, turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest content. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done in this situation? We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.